Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're sitting in something like a car.
Right.
But it's got like 16 propellers buzzing all around you. The door shuts. Maybe your heart jumps a bit. And then just smoothly, you lift straight up.
Vertically.
Yeah, no runway needed. You climb maybe 50 meters. And suddenly, wow, this incredible view just opens up cranes, docks, the whole city below.
Right.
Then you just come straight back down. Land exactly where you started.
That sounds exactly like the description, yeah, from The Economist. Their correspondent flew in one of these EHang EVTOLs, these electric vertical takeoff things.
Right, in Guangzhou.
In Guangzhou, yeah. And that feeling, that vertical liftoff, it really feels like, science fiction, doesn't it? It's a perfect way to kick off our deep dive today.
Absolutely, because that wasn't just some, futuristic demo. It really captures something huge. China's pushing hard right now.
Yeah.
This new industry they're calling the low-altitude economy.
And it seems to be moving from sci-fi to, well, almost everyday reality pretty fast. So our mission today, looking at the source material you shared, that Economist piece especially, is to really get into what is this low-altitude economy. See how it's already popping up in daily life over there, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Understand why the government is so keen. What's driving it so fast, and then look at the strengths, but also the challenges,
Okay, let's dive in. So what exactly is the low-altitude economy? It sounds kind of broad.
It is, yeah. At its core, it's basically the activity happening with airborne devices flying below 1,000 meters. So that covers, drones we're familiar with.
Sure.
All the way up to those more futuristic EVTOLs, the things people often call flying cars.
But it's not just a definition, is it? The government is putting some serious muscle behind this.
Oh, massive weight. The source points out the Prime Minister himself called it a new engine of growth. That was early last year in the big annual government report. And he put it right up there with things like AI and quantum computing. So this isn't just spotting a trend. It's like a core national strategy.
Okay.
The plan seems to be taking the playbook they used for electric vehicles, for EVs.
Right, where they've become dominant.
Exactly, and applying it here to try and, potentially dominate this whole new futuristic industry.
Okay, so back to the flying cars then. That EHang flight. Was that just a cool demo, or are these things genuinely getting closer to reality?
They're definitely getting closer to commercial reality. Maybe not mass transit just yet, but EHang had a huge milestone back in March.
Yep.
They got the world's first commercial passenger license for their EVTOL, and they're planning actual public demonstration flights soon in Guangzhou and Hefei.
The world's first. That feels significant.
It's huge. Now, actually running a regular widespread air taxi service, that still has regulatory hurdles for sure, but the momentum is there. The article mentions EHang sold 216 of these aircraft last year. Now, mostly to tourism businesses for sightseeing flights and things.
Okay, so not commuting yet.
Not yet commuting, no. But it shows there's a market actually developing.
And it's not just these dedicated aviation startups like EHang, right? The car companies are jumping in too, which kind of makes sense with the EV tech.
Exactly right. Lots of Chinese car makers are involved. XPeng, the EV maker.
Yeah.
They've got this wild concept, a six-wheeled vehicle, right? And it carries an EVTOL in the back, like in the boot.
No way.
Yeah. They're apparently aiming for mass production next year. Price tag under 2 million yuan, supposedly. And get this, they already have over 4,000 orders.
4,000 orders. For a car with a drone in the back.
Kind of, yeah. And even Honky, they make those fancy limos for officials, right? Even they've shown off a luxury EVTOL concept, the Tianyan one. So it's definitely capturing imagination across the board.
So there's this big vision, isn't there? Getting out of traffic, this three-dimensional freedom.
That's exactly the phrase Hu Huazi, EHang's CEO, used in the article. He contrasts that frustration of what he called 0.5-dimensional traffic jams. It's like driving 30 kilometers on Beijing's ring roads taking an hour. You know that feeling?
Oh, yeah.
He contrasts that with potentially doing the same trip in maybe 10 minutes by air, just opening up this whole new layer for short city hops.
But the source does throw a little cold water on that specific vision, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Especially for somewhere like Beijing.
It does, yeah. A bit of a reality check. Hu himself admits flying around central Beijing right now is purely hypothetical. The airspace is just incredibly tightly controlled.
Okay.
And let's be honest, the profitability of these flying car ventures, still a big question mark everywhere. The article notes Western companies have gone bust.
Right.
And while Chinese firms are getting investment, a lot is state money, which might not be purely about market demand,
Good point. So flying cars.
Yeah.
Exciting, coming soon,
Yep.
maybe,
Yep.
but not quite here yet.
Exactly. The now story, the thing that's already happening in a big way, that's drones.
Okay, drones. Yeah, the source painted a picture there that was honestly pretty surprising. That scene in Shenzhen at the Meituan kiosk.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's amazing because it sounds so normal, so mundane almost.
Yeah.
You've got office workers in Shenzhen queuing up at this little Meituan kiosk, but they're not waiting for a delivery guy on a scooter. They're collecting their lunch that's being dropped through a hatch.
From a drone.
From a drone, yeah. Drones land on the roof, drop bubble tea or chicken rice through another hatch. And what really struck me was the quote from that e-commerce worker, Huang Jiling.
Yeah.
She was just genuinely surprised that even cheap takeout was coming by drone. Like, she didn't expect it for just everyday, affordable food.
Yeah. That reaction says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It shows how normal it's becoming.
Yeah.
The scale is just, it's rocketing up.
It really is.
Yeah.
Meituan delivered over 200,000 meals by drone just in the first few months of this year.
Wow.
Which is almost double what they did in all of last year. Since they started back in 2021, there are over 500,000 drone orders completed.
Okay, 500,000 orders. But what's their goal? Where do they see this going?
Their ambition is huge. They want drones handling 10% of their total deliveries.
10%? Wait, Meituan is massive. What does 10% actually mean on a busy day?
Well, according to their projections in the article, on a peak day, that could be 10 million drone deliveries.
10 million a day.
A day. Just try to picture that. The sky buzzing with takeout drones. It's a staggering number. Really brings home the scale they're thinking about.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown. But doing that kind of volume, you need some serious infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Shenzhen seems to be the place where it's really happening.
Absolutely. Shenzhen has really leaned into this.
Wow.
By the end of last year, the city had apparently approved 250 specific drone delivery routes.
350 routes.
Yeah, and built nearly 500 dedicated terminals places for them to take off and land. And that infrastructure was key to enabling. I think the number was over 776,000 total drone deliveries in the city last year across different companies.
Okay.
Plus, they've pumped huge investment into the 5G networks, specifically for drones flying below 120 meters. You need that connectivity.
Right. So you've got the terminals, the routes, the 5G. But how do they keep it all safe?
Yeah.
Prevent drones bumping into each other, or helicopters, or buildings?
Good question. Meituan, for instance, they have the sophisticated control center in Shenzhen. The article described it during the post-lunch quiet time. They still had 41 drones flying at once, and over 100 during peak hours. Their system tracks everything, builds in safety buffers. They try to use exclusive routes.
Okay.
The drones themselves have sensors to avoid obstacles. And in places where routes might cross, like near the Great Wall where you might have tourist helicopters,
Right.
they apparently share flight plans ahead of time. Plus, Shenzhen itself is planning a citywide command center to oversee all low-altitude traffic.
And what about the efficiency compared to a guy on an e-bike weaving through traffic?
Oh, it's potentially much higher. The article mentioned Meituan is automating more of the ground stuff, collecting the food, weighing it, there's a limit, like 2.3 kilograms, fastening it onto the drone. But even now, one pilot sitting in that control center monitoring these self-flying drones can oversee hundreds of meals delivered each day. You just can't match that output with a human rider.
And what really stood out from that Meituan story was how the whole regulatory side seems to have shifted from being a blocker to almost an enabler.
That's a really crucial piece. The article talks about Meituan back in 2019, basically knocking on countless doors, just trying to get approvals.
Yeah, sounds tough.
Now, they can get a new route approved in days, not months. And officials are apparently even suggesting potential routes to them.
Wow, suggesting routes.
Yeah, it just shows how much the government is now actively smoothing the path for this industry.
Right, because it's not just food delivery, is it?
Yeah.
The source mentioned a whole bunch of other ways drones are being used all over China.
Oh, absolutely. It really paints a broader picture.
Yeah.
Beyond meals, you had, 2.7 million packages delivered by drone last year?
Okay.
China Post is using them to get mail to remote islands in Fujian province. Dozens of cities are using drones to shuttle blood between hospitals and clinics. In agriculture, there are like 250,000 drones spraying fertilizer or pesticide.
250,000, that's huge.
It is. They're using them to fight fires in skyscrapers, monitor borders for smuggling, fly medical test samples to labs. It really shows this isn't just about convenience. It's becoming a fundamental part of infrastructure.
Like a new layer for essential services.
Exactly. Reshaping things from emergency response to farming.
So, okay, it's clearly happening. Big scale, lots of different uses. But let's get back to the why. Why is China pushing this so hard, so fast? What's the real engine behind it?
Well, like you said earlier, that explicit government backing, the policy support, that's absolutely central. When the premier puts it up there with AI, that sends a powerful signal all the way down. And setting up that dedicated department just for the low-altitude economy in the state planning agency last December, that's a really strong commitment.
A whole department just for this. That seems like more than just talk.
It really is. The departments usually have much wider briefs, like national defense or something broad. One focused just on this. It shows they're serious about coordinating everything. Safety rules, business frameworks, the infrastructure needed.
And a big part of that coordination must be opening up the airspace.
Yeah.
Right? Which feels like a major shift for China.
Huge shift. Yeah. China's airspace has always been very tightly controlled, mostly by the military. So changing the rules to let 6 cities, Shenzhen, Hefei included, actually manage the airspace below 600 meters for commercial flights. That's a massive policy lever being pulled.
And it sounds like the local governments are falling over themselves to attract this industry. Maybe especially if their usual revenue streams, like from land sales, are down because of the property market.
It definitely seems to be a factor. You hear the slogan, demanding GDP from the sky. Local areas are making big pitches. The article mentioned Mianyang. It's in a mountainous area. Earthquakes happen there. They're trying to become a low-altitude hub. They see it as boosting their economy, sure, but also speeding up disaster relief, getting medicine to remote villages where roads are tough.
Makes sense.
And their pitch basically includes subsidies, skilled workers, and this incredibly permissive regulatory regime. They apparently told the reporter, all you need to do to fly is register 20 minutes in advance.
20 minutes? That sounds remarkably easy.
Almost too easy, maybe, but it shows how eager they are, though that local eagerness did cause a bit of a fuss in Pinyin County, didn't it?
Yeah, the auction thing.
Exactly. They tried to auction off low-altitude economy franchise rights for, like, 924 million yuan. Caused a bit of an uproar.
That's right.
They had to clarify later it wasn't about selling the airspace itself, it's still a national resource, but just the rights to operate the ground terminals, the landing spots.
Okay.
But it shows the intense pressure local governments feel to find new growth engines, and maybe some are getting a bit ahead of themselves.
Okay, so we've got the top-down strategy, the local push, the rules changing. But beyond the policy, are there other fundamental reasons China seems to be moving so much faster here than, say, the US or Europe?
I think one of the biggest reasons the source highlights is that this industry plays right into China's existing strengths, particularly manufacturing.
Right. Batteries and EVs.
Exactly. China is the world's biggest maker of both batteries and electric vehicles. And those technologies are absolutely fundamental for both drones and these EVTOLs.
Yeah, that connection seems crucial. Shenzhen being home to DJI, the big drone company, and BYD, the huge EV maker. That can't be a coincidence.
Not at all. You've got these giants, plus their massive supplier networks for both industries, all clustered together. Qiao Dong from Yunhe Capital put it nicely in the article, saying that the accumulation in the new energy sector, especially cars, is a very important reason for the explosive power we're seeing in the low-altitude economy.
And you mentioned the regulations earlier. That flexible approach, the nimble regulation, that seems key too.
It does. Instead of maybe spending years drafting perfect rules up front, which can happen elsewhere, China seems more willing to develop the rules as the industry grows, sort of adapting policy to match the tech progress on the ground.
Like that quote from the Machuan guy.
Yeah, Mao Yinian. You have to have a policy that can match whatever technical progress that is being made, and officials actually suggesting routes. That's a really proactive approach, isn't it?
The source also mentioned something interesting about safety perceptions and consumer acceptance. It hinted that maybe standards aren't as strict initially, but Chinese consumers are more okay with things like drone delivery.
That's what a McKinsey survey suggested, yeah. It found like 86% of Chinese consumers were keen on drone delivery. Compare that to only 53% of Americans.
Big difference.
Huge. So maybe there's less public pressure for those super rigorous, time-consuming certifications right from day one, which could allow companies to deploy faster, learn from real flights, and iterate.
Iterate faster.
Yeah.
The phrase keeps coming up, doesn't it? Across manufacturing, regulation, consumer attitudes.
It really feels like a core theme. Huazi from EHAM talked about iterating faster, using manufacturing strengths, and just getting flight experience. And Robin Riedel from McKinsey noted that maybe Western firms focus more on perfecting the product first, whereas Chinese firms might prioritize getting to market faster, showing a little bit more willingness to experiment.
And this all feeds into that idea you hear discussed in China, Wan Dou Chaoche, overtaking on the bend.
Exactly. Trying to leapfrog established players, particularly in the West, in these new tech areas like EVTOLs, even if their traditional aviation industry isn't as mature. It's like what they arguably did with electric cars versus the legacy automakers.
So it's a tech strategy, but also very much a policy strategy.
Absolutely. Mao Yinian called it a tech play, but also fundamentally a policy play. The two are deeply intertwined here.
So looking ahead then, we see this massive momentum, huge ambition. What kind of scale are they actually projecting? And what are the main hurdles or challenges still in the way?
The official projections from China's Civil Aviation Authority are pretty eye-watering. They're talking about a turnover of 1.5 trillion yuan by the end of this year.
This year, seriously?
That's the projection. Rising to 3.5 trillion yuan by 2035. If that happens, it's a really significant chunk of the economy.
Wow. Okay. But you mentioned challenges earlier. Profitability, especially for those flying cars.
Yeah, that's still a big question mark, particularly for passenger EVTOLs. Finding that commercially viable model beyond, say, niche tourism or maybe some emergency uses at first, that's tough.
Right.
And as we noted, with so much state investment involved, the growth might be driven partly by policy goals or national pride, not just pure market signals and profit potential.
And it sounds like even the central government is a bit worried about managing this explosive growth, making sure it's coordinated.
They definitely are. The National Planning Agency has put out warnings. They don't want local governments just blindly following trends and rushing in.
Creating waste and duplication.
Yes, exactly, leading to redundant infrastructure and disorderly competition. They're really pushing this idea of one country, one chessboard, trying to guide it all strategically from the top.
Still, despite those coordination challenges, the overall picture is just one of incredible speed, incredible ambition, turning stuff that really felt like science fiction into reality remarkably quickly.
It really is. It makes that quote from Yihang's Huaji feel quite apt, almost poignant. The era we are in now is already the future era referred to by science fiction movies. It's quite something to see policy, tech, and market forces align like this to basically invent a new industry.
So if we try to sum this all up, China's low-altitude economy, it's this incredibly fast government-driven push. It's leveraging their existing strengths, particularly in batteries and EVs. Combining that with a real willingness to iterate quickly, experiment with rules, maybe accept certain risks.
Right.
To take things like flying cars and mass drone delivery out of the realm of fantasy and make them, well, surprisingly real, surprisingly fast, and aiming for enormous scale.
It's a really potent mix, a fascinating example of how a centrally planned system can also foster rapid commercialization and push technological boundaries, literally creating this new layer of activity right above our heads.
Yeah, and it leaves you with a really interesting question to ponder, doesn't it? Given this unique combination, the state direction, the fast iteration, the consumer acceptance, is this whole push in China just about creating some cool new services? You know, faster takeout, quicker deliveries.
Or is it something bigger?
Right. Or is it actually fundamentally starting to redefine what cities of the future might look like, how we move around them, how goods get delivered? Is it maybe challenging the established ways we think about aviation, about safety, about regulation, even about how innovation itself happens, especially compared to more market-led approaches elsewhere?